Hi, Alan Rogers, Interim Dean of Academic Affairs at Vermont Tech, and I wanted to introduce to you in this short video, the model that we're piloting to evaluate new programs or new program proposals. It was developed by Lit, the Administrative Dean, and we've used it a few times. I think it's a useful tool, not only for us to evaluate, but it's also useful for the program champions to assess the feasibility, the viability of programs. And it's been a tool as well where the program champions have been able to vary some of the variables, such as enrolling class, retention rates, faculty levels, to develop a program that is more feasible. So hopefully you'll find it a useful tool. So the actual spreadsheet is relatively short. I'll scroll down. There we go. I've highlighted in pale blue the items that you'll probably want to change in order to evaluate your program or to develop a model. This particular example is for a fictitious new healthcare program. So let me start at the top and work down, and I'll show you how this works. So retention rates, you can change the retention rate, expected retention rate of the program. This one we put in 80%. The actual college rate I think is closer to 70%. You would also put in the full-time to headcount ratio. So if you have 100 expected headcount of students coming in and 75 are expected to be full-time, the rate would be 75%. In the absence of any other information, we'll use the college's 5% aid level, which is right there. Tuition rate, you notice in this particular case, there's been a change to the tuition rate. One can change the tuition rate. For most programs, however, you should use the academic year number that you're planning to introduce the program. The expected annual tuition rate inflator, we're using 3% at the moment. And that's a figure you could change, but unless you have more knowledge than we have at the moment, then I would stick with the 3%. If you have a large piece of equipment or a new lab requirement or some combination of things like that, you would put in that amount right here. In this case, we put in $100,000 and then the expected life in years. Down below, you see that generates an annual reserve that's built in as an expense. So in this particular case, down below you'll see a figure something like $6,700 that's put in as an annual expense. This becomes a replenishment line item. We can put in the entering class numbers, and then based on retention and full-time equivalent ratios, it will generate a full-time equivalent for the 3 years. And you see this is growing because we have a growing number of students coming in and being retained. Based on these full-time equivalent numbers and the tuition rate and tuition rate increases, it generates a expected net revenue figure. Then we get to the expenses. In here we have the salary and wages. These numbers are the direct salaries and wages. The benefits are auto-generated using the average benefit rates the college experiences. You can, in this particular case, we're looking at a director. You can eliminate the director if you want to, and then it disappears. You can change the starting time for faculty if you care to as well, as part of the feasibility analysis. These numbers are then auto-generated with increases based on the inflation rates. The supplies and other services and travel numbers, these might come, or you might use your existing budget numbers, figures to help identify these. The one number here that might be a little bit different, we think that it's important that we put in an amount that will be used for marketing and general advertising of that specific program. So in this particular case, we put in $10,000. As you can see, these numbers then have auto generation of inflationary increases. we get to a total of the expenses. So in this, in year one, we're seeing about 250,000, increasing to 343, and then 353 in year three. These next couple lines are then generated, and these are the ultimate numbers that determine feasibility. The program revenue net of expenses, this is how much is left over after we deduct expenses from the net revenue. So these are direct expenses. These do not include the various kinds of overhead, which might be administration, general marketing, buildings and grounds, buildings, admissions, all those things that go that are not part of the direct costs of the program. Overall, for the college, currently based on actual figures, the contribution margin is 74%. That means any program that starts off that's less than 74% given today's expenses and revenues is actually requiring resources from other programs. In other words, other programs would be supporting a program that's less than 74% in contribution margin. So as we see in this particular model, for this particular healthcare program, as an example, this is again a fictitious example, this program is not meeting the target margins at all in the first 3 years. So if this were, for example, the first go-around for this program, the program champions and the administration might be sitting down and saying, okay, what can we do here? So clearly one could increase retention. We could look at increases in full-time equivalencies. We could look at tuition changes, reduction in capital. So let us, do that up in this assumptions area. Let's imagine that we can increase our retention rate to 82%, maybe full-time to 78%, reduce our capital equipment to 80,000. Now let's scroll down and see what happened here. Right, so we see some improvements. We do see some improvements in the first couple. Clearly, in our third year, we've hit our target margin, and maybe that's all we care to do at the moment. But you can see that in the first couple years, based on existing costs and actual costs, that this program would need to be carried a little bit in the first 2 years. What we could do then, taking a look at other options here, we could look at increasing the initial entering class to 18 and maybe 19 here and maybe 21 in this particular class. That of course generates more net revenues, and we may or may not want to make changes here if our thinking is that in fact that these faculty and directors can, in aggregate, cover the additional entering class numbers. So let's scroll down and take a look here. All right, so we see some improvements. So essentially, in this particular revision, we see that the contribution margin in the first year is 28%. That means other programs and the college in general would be carrying this program during the first year. In the second year, we almost achieved break-even margins based on averages, and by the third year we see a contribution margin that is ahead of the general target margin or average of the college. So I would encourage you to take a look at this, to see how it works. Of course, we can make anything look like it's going to work on a spreadsheet. So after if we are able to find a series of assumptions that makes a program fiscally viable based on the target margins, we really have to go back and ask, are these realistic? Can it be done? So, but this is again one tool in a number of tools, and I hope that this quick overview of the model has been helpful. And again, it will be made available to faculty and other program champions who are trying to take a look at the viability of their new programs and their new program proposals. So I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Thanks.